Tonight, return to war. Israel resumes airstrikes and ground operations in Gaza, calling for more evacuations with hostages still held captive by Hamas. Plus, Iran-backed attacks, missiles launched at commercial ships intercepted by a U.S. warship as the Pentagon threatens appropriate responses in the Red Sea. And ahead of the Christmas cookie season, the key to healthy holiday eating.
So it's really just about figuring out what it is that you like and then coming up with a healthier alternative.
All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. Israel's renewed ground war leaves civilians in Gaza scrambling. Good evening in Washington, I'm Jenna Browder. Israel is expanding ground operations in Gaza and intensifying airstrikes as the lives of remaining hostages held by Hamas hang in the balance. The Israel Defense Forces say airstrikes hit 200 targets overnight in Gaza. The IDF now carrying out some 10,000 airstrikes since the war began. Israel's war cabinet is reportedly set to approve a significant increase in humanitarian aid and fuel to Gaza as the Israeli military begins a new phase in fighting after the collapse of a tenuous ceasefire Friday. U.S. officials are urging Israel to help protect innocent civilians while emphasizing that Hamas began the war with the terror atrocities of October 7th.
We believe that far too many civilians have been killed. But again, this goes back to the underlying problem of this entire situation, which is that Hamas has embedded itself inside civilians, inside civilian homes, inside mosques, in schools, in churches. It is Hamas that is putting these civilians in harm's way. Why doesn't Hamas lay down its arms? Why doesn't Hamas move out of schools? Why doesn't Hamas take additional steps to protect civilians? Because we think they should, as we think Israel should.
A New York Times report late last week details Israeli intelligence about Hamas plans for another terror attack similar to the one carried out in October. Israeli and U.S. officials, though, say they were unaware of the intelligence. Here at home, the University of Michigan has canceled a controversial student vote related to the war. Critics say it's centered around an anti-Israel resolution labeling the Jewish nation as a genocidal apartheid state. Gary Lane explains.
Resolution AR 1325 asks students at the Ann Arbor campus to approve university accountability in the face of genocide. The university stopped the vote late last week after the pro-Palestinian Tahrir Coalition sent an email to the entire student body urging approval of the resolution. Administration officials called that a violation of university rules and tainted the voting process. If students had voted and approved the anti-Israel resolution, it may have set a precedent for similar votes at other colleges and universities. The son of a Hamas founder, Mossab Hassan Youssef, addressed the students before voting began, saying he could not believe activists asked students to make the choice.
A mob that force such a respectful educational institution to vote on such a thing. It's absurd.
The resolution refers to Palestine as a victim of settler colonialism, and it calls on the University of Michigan to recognize the millions of people undergoing genocide in Gaza. The resolution also calls for the University of Michigan to revisit its decision against forming a committee to, quote, investigate the ethics of its investments in apartheid regimes. Protesters made similar demands at the height of the BDS, or Boycott, Sanctions, and Divestment movement against Israel. Youssef calls the apartheid allegation idiotic.
We have 1.6 million Arabs in the state of Israel. That's a huge percentage. They have representatives in the parliament, the Israeli Knesset. Arabic, the language Arabic, is an official language in the state of Israel.
And Youssef contends Hamas, not Israel, is committing genocide. He reminded the audience of the October 7th terror attacks and that the Hamas charter advocates the destruction of the state of Israel.
It all begins with killing Jews. This is what motivates them. But to go and ethnically cleanse more than 20 communities, killing everything in your way, and everything is documented. This is what Israel suffered on October 7th. And this cannot be compared to the war victims in Gaza.
The Geneva Convention describes genocide as a crime committed with the intent to destroy a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group in whole or in part. One aspect of genocide is the forcible transference of children from one group to another. The Hamas kidnapping of Jewish children and holding them as hostages fits the genocide definition. Yusuf urges students to engage in dialogue and conversation to discover the truth about Hamas and its goals.
Educational institutions have been invaded by Hamas ideology, by the name of Palestine and by the name of revolution. Who cares? Anti-Semitism is Nazism, and it's rejected. It should be rejected on this campus, should be rejected everywhere in the United States.
Gary Lane, CBN News.
Thank you, Gary. And for more on this, we're joined by Rabbi Abraham Cooper of the Simon Wiesenthal Center. Rabbi Cooper, welcome. Great to have you with us this evening.
Thank you, Jenna.
What do you make?
Thank you for having me.
What do you make of this resolution? Yeah, this resolution at the University of Michigan and this anti-Semitism that we're openly seeing on some of our college campuses.
Well, it's interesting and, of course, unbelievably depressing to see the most elite universities across our country actually embracing the narrative of Hamas, which is a genocidal narrative, and to do so after October 7th, that horrific day where more Jews were murdered in one day than any time since the end of the Nazi Holocaust in the previous century, where young women were mass raped, where children were kidnapped, sometimes with their parents, sometimes alone. We're talking about a degree of barbarity that was captured on the body cams and on social media by the perpetrators. This is not like Nazi Germany where they hid the mass atrocities. Hamas reveled in the international attention and then has managed, whether it's universities in Germany, mass demonstrations in the UK, and across the United States, where you see the atrocities that have been committed by Hamas are excused, or by basically saying, yes, it was perhaps it was a little bit too much, but after all, and then you have the checklist: the Israelis, apartheid, the Israelis, colonizers, Jewish people, of course, had only been in the Holy Land for 3,500 years. But to see the massive number of people embracing a narrative which is not only anti-Israel and not only anti-Semitic, it's opening the door for genocide. And at our finest universities across America, where you have academic backing for these really atrocious language, the lies, etc., making Jewish student life on campuses sometimes near impossible. And we're talking about MIT, Harvard. We're talking about Penn, UCLA.
Yeah.
This is a challenge across the board. And of course, we're even seeing now a number of cases, one in Canada, I saw one in Virginia, where Jewish communities are told that the inclusion of a Star of David on the holiday season presentations from the cities have been removed because of the sensitivities of who? Hamas? It's a very difficult and trying time for the Jewish people here in the United States and, of course, in Israel. And we rely on our allies and our friends, especially among our Christian friends, to stand together with us. And I was also just in Berlin, and I can tell you that for the first time really ever, the German authorities are beginning to understand that what's the threat here is not just against the 250,000 Jews that are in Germany, but against their democratic values, the country's values, its constitution, etc. And we'll have to see, but right now, it's a community that's very much on edge. And I see, thank God, a lot of young Jews standing up and putting the Star of David around their necks and even affixing it to their cars. It's a difficult time indeed.
Indeed. Rabbi Cooper, that's all the time we have for this evening, but we appreciate you coming on this evening. It's always good to see you. Rabbi Abraham Cooper with the Simon Wiesenthal Center. Have a great evening. Thank you.
Happy Hanukkah.
Well, in the Red Sea, a U.S. Navy destroyer was forced to intervene after Iran-backed rebels attacked 3 commercial ships. The Pentagon says the assault lasted 7 hours. National security correspondent Caitlin Burke joins us now with more on that. Caitlin, how is the U.S. responding?
Jenna, the USS Carney responded Sunday morning after Iranian-backed Houthi rebels in Yemen began firing both missiles and drones at commercial ships in the Red Sea. Several of the missiles struck their targets, with the drones intercepted and shot down by the U.S. destroyer as it rushed to render aid.
Houthis are playing with fire by launching missiles over U.S. ships.
U.S. Central Command says the attacks represent a direct threat to international commerce and maritime security and believe the rebels were, quote, fully enabled by Iran.
We are talking about the Houthis here. They're the ones with their finger on the trigger. But that gun, the weapons here are being supplied by Iran. And Iran, we believe, is the ultimate party responsible for this.
A Houthi military spokesman said ships associated with Israel will continue to be targeted until, quote, the Israeli aggression against our steadfast brothers in the Gaza Strip stops. An Israeli spokesperson, however, denied any link to the vessels from Sunday's attack. The U.S., meanwhile, says it will work with its allies and partners in considering how to respond.
The position of the United States, consistent with the position of the UN Security Council and consistent with the position of maritime nations across the world, is that attacks on commercial shipping in international waters are totally unacceptable and have to stop.
The Pentagon does not believe the USS Carney was the target of Sunday's assault. However, U.S. troops serving in Iraq and Syria have been attacked more than 70 times since Washington began backing Israel's war on Gaza. Jenna?
Caitlin, what is the administration's strategy when it comes to responding to those kinds of attacks?
Well, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan says the U.S. is ultimately trying to keep the war in Gaza from spilling into a broader conflict. Steps are being taken to address alarming behavior like strikes on U.S. forces and attacks on commercial vessels. When it comes to U.S. troops, the Pentagon is taking measures to ensure our soldiers are safe. And they've also conducted strikes against facilities used by Iran-backed militias. The State Department says it's also holding the Iraqi government responsible for attacks launched from their soil. When it comes to attacks on shipping vessels, Sullivan says this is a global problem, and the U.S. wants to see a global response. Freedom of navigation in international waters is a top priority, and attacks by Houthis are becoming a recurring problem. Last month, they claimed to have shot down a U.S. drone, and in late October, the same U.S. destroyer involved in this weekend's incident intercepted 4 missiles and 15 drones headed from Houthi-controlled territories towards targets in Israel. Jenna?
All right, National Security Correspondent Caitlin Burke, thank you very much. Well, from homemade cookies to food-filled parties, how to eat healthy over the holidays when Faith Nation returns. Welcome back. The fallout from the American opioid epidemic seen at the Supreme Court today. Justices heard arguments over how OxyContin maker Purdue Pharma plans to move ahead with its settlement to compensate victims. At question, should the company's owners, the Sackler family, be afforded common bankruptcy protections, essentially shielding family members from personal liability?
There's a fundamental bargain in bankruptcy law, which is you get a discharge when you put all your assets on the table to be divided up among your creditors. And I think everybody thinks that the Sacklers didn't come anywhere close to doing that. And the question is, why should they get the discharge? It would be a kind of extraordinary thing if we gave the power to basically subvert this basic bargain in bankruptcy law.
Right, and that goes to my second point, Justice Kagan, which is that they're not getting a discharge. They're getting a release.
The Biden administration argued today bankruptcy law doesn't give courts the ability to remove liability from a third party like the Sackler family. All right, well, it is prime time for holiday weight gain, but with a little planning, you can avoid putting on the extra pounds while still enjoying some seasonal treats. Medical reporter Lori Johnson brings us some simple recommendations this Christmas.
Health experts say the secret to enjoying holiday treats in moderation involves filling up on healthy food. That means focusing on protein like beans, chicken, and fish, or a low-sugar protein shake, which can help reduce the urge to overindulge elsewhere.
Protein is the macronutrient that curbs hunger hormones most.
Vegetables also naturally make us feel full and contain nutrients that help manage hunger hormones. A good rule of thumb is to fill half your plate with vegetables.
I personally love arugula. I eat it practically every day. And 1 cup of arugula is 2 to 5 calories, but has 30 vitamins, minerals, and antioxidants.
Depending on your plans, pack some healthier snacks like nuts, fruit, and hard-boiled eggs. The idea is to not get too hungry.
That, in and of itself, can result in consuming way more calories than you otherwise would.
At dinners or parties, choose mostly healthy items, or when possible, bring one.
If you're invited to a holiday event, you don't have to bring a dessert. You can bring something healthy that you want to eat so that way, if everyone's putting out their items on the table, you'll know that there's at least one thing that's healthy.
Consider healthy holiday swaps like peppermint tea instead of peppermint candy, dark chocolate instead of fudge, and chopped apple with cinnamon and raisins instead of cookies.
It's all about the swaps, right? We don't want to deprive ourselves of anything, especially around the holidays. So it's really just about figuring out what it is that you like and then coming up with a healthier alternative.
Well-meaning friends and family can often encourage you to eat more of your favorite foods during the holidays, so a tactful response can preserve the relationship and your waistline.
Kind of preparing yourself with a healthy, happy, no thank you, or the dish looks great, but I'm full, it's been a delight. So learning how to politely say no can be very engaging during a holiday party without being overbearing or insulting.
Finally, research shows stress can cause us to crave unhealthy foods, so experts recommend doing things that can reduce anxiety, like getting plenty of sleep, exercise, and time spent in prayer. Lori Johnson, CBN News.
All right, great tips. Thank you, Lori. Well, a mission to plant 1,000 churches. We'll show you where and how after this. Churches are closing their doors at an alarming rate. About 4,500 Protestant churches in the U.S. closed in 2019, the most recent year on record. But one North Carolina church family has made it their mission to offset the trend. As Brody Carter reports, they're doing it with a goal of planting 1,000 churches in this generation.
So every demographic study that I've seen of recent shows that the group that is growing, maybe the fastest, one of the fastest at least, is this NONE group, the nuns. And they're no longer, they're very skeptical of institutionalized religion. One of the things we can get wrong is to think that they're not interested in spirituality.
J.D. Greer should know, as he served as the Southern Baptist Convention president from 2018 to 2021. At its peak, the denomination grew to more than 16 million members in some 48,000 churches nationwide. Since then, a slow yet steady decline has stripped away more than 3 million of its members.
Honestly, probably we're not practicing believers anyway, but them and then their descendants are dropping out.
Some may connect this decline to internal divisions over LGBTQ rights, a sex abuse scandal, and the question over females serving as pastors.
A lot of the decline in those numbers is just, it's cultural Christianity. But if you actually look at the statistics on the amount of what I would consider true disciples, those numbers are actually encouraging.
Today, Greer focuses on his own ministry in Durham, North Carolina, as pastor at the Summit Church, which has seen massive growth despite uncertainty in the SBC.
Because of the empty tomb, our road doesn't end at the grave. If anything, it begins there for those who are in Christ.
What we're after here is not demographic increase. What we're after is real followers of Jesus.
To date, the Summit Church has strategically planted 75 North American churches in metropolitan cities and college towns, with more than 500 planted worldwide. Their mission is to supply these communities with a church that can proclaim and live out the gospel.
Unfortunately, a lot of them are not reached in the church by just doing great music, great guest services, and relevant sermons. A lot of them have to be reached outside the church, which means that we have to equip our members to carry the gospel outside the walls of the church. That's always been important, but it's more important than ever.
Charleston Baptist Association is 270 years old and growing. Harbor Church is one of the newest additions thanks to J.D. Greer Ministries.
My desire was to be used by God in my generation to be able to share the hope of the gospel in an area of need, and I found that in Charleston.
Summit sent church planter Jonathan Lenker to start Harbor City Church in Charleston, South Carolina.
We came here with 35 people as a part of a launch team. We grew to about 60 and then went public in September 18th of 2022. We've since grown. Last weekend we had 201 people here at our service.
Since the 1700s, Charleston has been known as the Holy City for its religious tolerance, boasting some 400 churches. Lenker, however, feels that title has lost its meaning over time.
If you talk to someone who really knows the city, you'll understand that most of those churches are empty on a Sunday. The ultimate vision, like we will know that we fulfilled our mission, is to see the Holy City holy in truth and not just in name.
While the gospel remains the same, people and culture do not. This is why Greer and his network plant churches to reach new generations and help them grow.
God has given the church one commission. Jesus' Great Commission only has one verb in it. We don't see that in English because it looks like a bunch of verbs, but the only verb is make disciples. Everything else he says in there is a participle, which means it strengthens or amplifies the verb. The commission that God gives to the church in every generation is make disciples.
And that was Brody Carter reporting. Thank you, Brody. Still ahead, Oxford's word of the year is full of charisma, but you may have never used it. Finally tonight, Oxford University Press has named the 2023 Word of the Year. But unless you're in Gen Z, you might have to Google it. The word is Rizz, R-I-Z-Z. If you think you haven't heard it before, it's actually the shortened form of the word charisma. Rizz expresses a person's style, charm, or attractiveness. The contemporary word was chosen by language experts to show how language is formed and shared. More significantly, it shows how younger generations create and define the language they use, and how internet culture increasingly shapes language trends. And that's going to do it for tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope you have a great evening, and we'll see you tomorrow.